and discuss a little bit about occupational health disparities. So first and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge our co-authors. Hannah E. Kling, she actually used this as her master's in public health thesis, and she's able to be with us today. And our senior co-author is Alberto Martinez, who is also able to be with us today. We have no relevant conflicts of interest or any other disclosures, and we'd like to acknowledge our partial funding from the National Institute for Occupational Safety through K grant. Alright, so I'd like to begin very briefly just talking about occupation and work in general. So as I'm sure all of us are very well aware, work is a very, very large part of our lives. 8 hours a day, basically half of your waking hours on any given day. And the World Health Organization actually considers work to be a major social determinant of health. However, certain disparities can arise in occupational epidemiology. There's employment of certain races or certain ethnicities in differing proportions within the blue-collar industry, the green-collar industry, the white-collar industry. This can lead to health disparities. The occupational health disparities that we're most interested in here would be exposures, illnesses, injuries, and also fatalities related to occupation. So one great example that we can look at in an occupational setting of the health disparity is obesity in the workplace. So we found Dr. Martinez used nationally representative data from the National Health Interview Survey to analyze the prevalence of obesity. So we found that Black female workers had a higher prevalence of obesity as compared to other races, and white workers of both genders also tend to have higher rates of obesity. And also Hispanic male workers were found in a later study by Dr. Yu to have high rates of obesity as well. And throughout the study period, the Hispanic male workers actually had the largest increase in obesity over that time period. Another study by Dr. Creighton, he looked at Hispanic immigrant workers, and he found that after they came to the United States and started integrating into the workforce and beginning the process of acculturation, they began to develop obesity through increased allostatic load. He also found that these workers tended to have poor diets, they had less vegetable fruit consumption, and they also tended to have higher sweet drink consumption as well. There could also be possible differences in the physical activity levels with these Hispanic workers that could explain the trends in obesity that we can see. So to assess how occupational and leisure time physical activity actually affects our obesity rates, Dr. Martinez's lab carried out a cross-sectional pilot study in order to characterize the occupational physical activity levels in commercial construction workers. And the major findings from this study, they suggest that the workers, they did tend to engage in high levels of physical activity, both at work, occupational physical activity, and also outside of work in leisure time. They even actually met the United States Department of Health and Human Services guidelines for physical activity. But despite these two findings, still 85% of the workers in this workforce were obese, which is very interesting to think about, because if they have such high levels of physical activity, you would think that they wouldn't have such high obesity. And also in this study, we found that correlations between musculoskeletal pain severity and the objectively measured physical activity levels were not statistically significant. So despite the stark differences between white-collar workers and blue-collar workers on their occupational exposures, they really don't report different health complaints. They all have very high rates of musculoskeletal pain. So the underlying mechanism behind why these specific workforces report these high levels of musculoskeletal pain is different. So if we think in a blue-collar setting, these workers typically report musculoskeletal pain due to underuse. So they'll be sitting at a computer for prolonged periods of time, they develop neck strain, and that in comparison, blue-collar workers, they typically develop musculoskeletal pain due to overuse, due to heavy material handling, for example. So in order to combat the increasing obesity epidemic, and also hopefully address the musculoskeletal pain in these populations, we found that workplace physical activity promotion approaches to be highly warranted in this population. When we did a literature review, we found that the past programs have been largely unsuccessful in actually improving the obesity rates and also lowering the musculoskeletal pain severity. And for those few studies that did actually look at musculoskeletal pain severity, they had very mild effects. So now I'd like to transition a little bit into our study that we performed in our lab. It's called the Walking Meeting Study. So over the past 50 years, there's been a shift in the United States workforce from predominance of jobs that have high levels of occupational physical activity to This could be like agriculture or manufacturing. And with the advent of new technology, development of the internet, the United States workforce has shifted more towards technological and service occupations. And with this shift in industry, there's also been a decrease in the physical demands in the workplace. And this can be directly reflected into the current obesity epidemic. And also, there's a strong association between these decreased physical demands and there's an increased prevalence of musculoskeletal pain complaints. And white-collar workers tend to be especially vulnerable to this because they're sedentary for a very long period of time. So the purpose of our study was to examine the association between an acute, defined as the past 7-day, musculoskeletal pain severity, and objectively measured occupational physical activity levels among a convenient sample of white-collar workers. And for the purpose of this workshop, we were asked to focus on the differences of workers by ethnicity. So we'll be stratifying by expanding ethnicity. So now into our materials and methods section. So we employed a mixed methods explanatory study design to assess the research question. Initially, we sent out an email recruitment to members of our public health department, and we ended up enrolling 18 white-collar office workers into our study. And the workers they first participated in a walking meeting workshop, shown up there under T0. And at the walking meeting workshop, they're basically just oriented to the study. They were shown how to conduct a walking meeting. And I'll come back to this slide, but they're presented with this kind of information. So on the left, we just show basic logistics of how to have a successful walk. On the right, you can see we made a pre-circumscribed path around our medical campus that they would be able to walk around twice. Alright, so back to the study design. So our study period lasted for 3 weeks, and this comprised 4 survey administrations, as you can see here. And our intervention, so week 1 we considered a baseline week. They didn't conduct a walking meeting, but we objectively measured their physical activity levels during that time. During weeks 2 and week 3, the workers would go usually weeks 2 to 4. They would conduct a 30-minute walking meeting 1 time each week. So at the conclusion of each of those weeks, they would then complete a survey, which then would report on their acute musculoskeletal pain severity for those prior 7 days. So the primary study measures that we used here, within the walking meeting survey instrument, so at each time point, the participants would self-report their acute musculoskeletal pain severity. So this is assessed using Tannehill's brief pain inventory. It's a 4-item survey instrument, each with a 10-point Likert scale, which are then averaged to give you a musculoskeletal pain severity score. This is on a scale where 0 is 10, where 10 is extreme pain and 0 is no pain. That was our primary outcome measure, the acute musculoskeletal pain severity. So our primary predictor variable, in order to objectively measure the physical activity levels of our participants, we employed the Actigraph GT3XP triaxial accelerometers. These are the same things that are used in the NMAs. And this was a belt device, as you can see on the right. We asked the participants to wear it pretty much all the time, except when they were showering, because they get wet. And this was able to, it's basically just like a pedometer. It objectively measures the physical activity levels of our participants. Briefly on the statistical analyses, we performed basic descriptive statistics in order to characterize our study sample. And then we used non-parametric Spearman's correlations. We examined the study objectives, seeing the association between acute musculoskeletal pain severity and physical activity levels in the workplace. So on to the results section. This is our overall demographics of our sample. So you can see that our sample was predominantly female, 76%. They're predominantly of other race, also at 76.5%. Our sample was predominantly Hispanic, and our sample was also predominantly college graduates as well. So this graph shows the average pain scores. We also stratified by Hispanic ethnicity. So you can see that Hispanics here at each time point, they had a higher, they reported more severe musculoskeletal pain than their non-Hispanic counterparts. You can see that at baseline, this discrepancy already exists. As we move forward to T2 and T3, 2 weeks after they did their walking meeting intervention, that actually broadened more. Because there's only a differential between the Hispanics and the non-Hispanics of about 1.6 at T1. That expands up to a differential of about 2 units at T3. It seemed like the Hispanics actually they had a larger increase in their musculoskeletal pain due to the walking meeting protocol. Now this shows between Hispanics and non-Hispanics the average minutes that they spend in occupational physical activity. So we see here that the Hispanics, they actually spend much less time than the non-Hispanics in occupational physical activity. And these are the results of our Spearman's correlation coefficients. And so we found here that although not significant, the objectively measured occupational physical activity levels, they were inversely associated with the acute musculoskeletal pain severity. So at baseline, we didn't observe this correlation very strongly. It was only negative 0.1. But after our 2 weeks of intervention, the correlation was much stronger, negative 0.6 and negative 0.5. So we found that the participants, as they started having more occupational physical activity, their musculoskeletal pain decreased. So just a quick recap, our primary findings here: Hispanics self-report slightly higher musculoskeletal pain severity scores than non-Hispanics across all 3 of our study time points. The minutes in occupational physical activity were less among Hispanics as compared to non-Hispanics, again at all 3 time points. And acute musculoskeletal pain severity is inversely associated, but not significantly, with the occupational physical activity levels at each of the 3 time points. So there's a few limitations in this study that warrant discussion. First of all, as this was a very small pilot study, it was primarily being used for a master's in public health thesis. We had a very small sample size. We only were able to include 18 members. Also, the intervention dosage, we only included 30 minutes a week of a walking. We didn't want to, overburden the participants by trying to get them to do 3 or 4 walking meetings a week. So, and also, this was a very short study period, only 3 weeks, so we weren't able to see longitudinally or the long term how musculoskeletal pain would change in relation with occupational physical activity. And also, even though our sample was all white-collar workers, we didn't really collect any differences or any data on their workplace exposures, because there's definitely differences in the white-collar occupations themselves, which ones are going to have more or less musculoskeletal pain. So in conclusion, future studies, first and foremost, they should address our limitations. So use a larger sample size with a longer study period, and also increase the intervention dosage. When we increase that larger sample size, we'll be able to more easily examine racial, gender, and ethnic disparities. And also, future studies, I would say, could collect data on chronic musculoskeletal conditions such as arthritis. We didn't collect that data in our study. Lifestyle factors such as smoking and alcohol use have been shown to relate to musculoskeletal pain severity. I would also recommend doing a longer baseline physical activity level. While we did 1 week, it would be probably more advantageous to have that over the course of a month, perhaps. And then also we can collect information on their specific anatomic musculoskeletal pain locations. This would be very enlightening to show which occupations have more or less musculoskeletal pain in a certain part of the body. And in conclusion, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much again for having me here today. It was really an honor and privilege to be here. My first ever scientific conference presentation. Any questions? Yes.
Can you go back to the slide with the graph, to show the scores over the weeks? Yeah, so I guess could you explain why it's kind of flat between T1 and T2, and then you see the difference? Because they were walking between both of those time points, right?
Correct, yeah, so at T1, those numbers reflect like the previous 7 days, their pain scores. So that's when they weren't doing any walking meetings, but for T2 and T3, they were doing walking meetings. So that's a really wonderful question, and your guess is as good as mine. That we couldn't really, come up with any story why why the pain scores were, very flat in the first week of the intervention, and then the second week they seem to shoot up. So.
Did you have any information on any results that they have done since starting the study? So in between the 30-minute walking meeting program?
Yeah, so in each survey administration, we had actually a pretty detailed collection of their physical activity levels. We asked them about transportation, did they walk to work, how much vigorous exercise, how much moderate exercise did they do. So there's a pretty sizable self-reported section.
Is it true that they say no pain, no gain?
some studies on that, but it was mostly in the clinical